Yeah, absolutely.
And Mary described this, that she'd had this, many other people talk about this. It was the downloading of what we call a knowledge capsule, if you like, a kind of multi-dimensional template, which would unfold over time. As certain events happen, like a time capsule, as certain events happen, it would unfold. And anyway, I felt marvelous. I was totally unafraid. I felt this incredible attraction to the being, very, very warm, and was extremely, extremely relaxed. And I remember closing my eyes because I felt so nice. And when I opened my eyes, the being was not against the wall, but it was now standing at the foot of the bed by the door. And I was really as cool as a cucumber, and just watching and getting that feeling, that downloading. There was a huge amount of information that I couldn't interpret, but I knew. Well, subsequently, later on, as I got older, I realized what had happened. This downloading of very, very complex information was being put into my head. And then the being just left. And when I told my mother the next morning, hey, this being came into the room and this and that and that. And my mother said to me, no, you're imagining things. It was actually me. I must have come into your room during the night or something. So I left it at that, obviously she didn't want me to get scared. She didn't want me.
Sure.
I had a dream, which I didn't. And subsequent to that, there would be more interactions, but they were not so peaceful. And what actually happened, whatever happened to me, they took away the memory. But you can always remember the beginning of it, and you always remember the end of it. And another time, as I was old, as about 15, and we'd moved from Durban North in the bush, if you like, the
right.
border of the suburbs, to the beachfront, where we lived in an apartment and on the beach, and we were on the third floor. And of course, in South Africa, all the windows are burglar proofed; you can't get out.
Yes. And
3:00 in the morning, I don't know, I wake up near naked outside the door. And I was very groggy, and I'm standing there, and I knock on the door, and I remember very well, I hear the chain being unlocked from the inside, which is a very important point, because you can't go out the door and then
of course.
And then the handle opens, and my father looks out, and he goes, "Oh my God, it's Neil." And my mother says, "Well, what are you doing? What are you doing there?" And I looked at them like they were nuts. They looked at me like I was nuts. And nothing was ever said. I came back in and went to bed. Years later, when my mother realized that I'd got into this world of exopolitics, she started to remember these things, and she can't account for them, but she won't admit that it could be an extraterrestrial event.
Right.
I think it frightens her somewhat. But there was of course, there are other intimate experiences between then, and I'm just telling you the big ones, if you like.
Sure. Yeah, and let me stop you for just a second, because I was in South Africa and Zimbabwe last year, and I can really relate exactly to what you're talking about. So you're saying that you were locked in your house for the night,
yeah,
and then at some point you simply woke up and you were actually physically outside the house. Somehow you had gotten outside the house.
That's right.
Despite all the physical security measures that are in place.
Yeah.
In a typical neighborhood there.
No, you know what it's like, the security,
That's amazing.
Yes. So it's very useful to know, that there was no way to get out near our.
Absolutely. That's correct. Yeah. It's a great reference point. And you think, you have no recollection necessarily of, I know it's generic to say how you got there, but I mean, you don't recall there being, a bright light in your room or anything like that?
No, I don't recall that at all.
Wow. Okay. All right. Very good. Yeah. So that was when you were about 15. So,
yeah.
So please go on.
Yeah. There were many things that happened as well, just sort of being taken back inside and being paralyzed and feeling them around you and that kind of thing. But,
right.
I've been in Hong Kong 17 years. So let's say about 18, 19 years ago, I was living in the UK. And again, always 3:00 in the morning. This seems to be the time,
Yes.
You want to get taken, just book it.
Exactly.
And I woke up 3:00 in the morning, and I was out of my body. I can tell you now, I was out of my body. Again, the blue hue, and two beings. I can only describe them as human form, but made of like light.
Yes.
You know,
Wow.
low level, very strange. It's really very difficult to explain because I'm as shocked as I am now as I was then when I think of it.
Well, it is I don't mean to interrupt you, but it is difficult to explain, and yet that's the interesting thing about not only doing the radio show that I'm doing, the research that you're doing, but after a while, and I was going through this yesterday, watching some of the YouTube videos and things, there are amazing consistencies in all of these stories.
Correct.
The story you're telling, the story that so many other people could tell, while I can literally feel the shock, I can hear it in your voice as you're telling the story. It's as genuine as it is, it's incredibly consistent eyewitness testimony and experiences, and the 3:00 in the morning, the light, it's amazing how these stories all parallel each other. So again, I'm sorry, please go
yes,
on.
No, that's fine. And what actually happened was I still had a body, but I had one on one side of me and holding my elbow and crouching down, and another on the other side of me, comforting me, if you like. I mean, I wasn't afraid. And I was pulled into this matrix, I'm using human words,
Sure, of course.
Typical situation. Pulled into this matrix of lighter fuel. When you have lighter fuel on your hand, it evaporates and turns cold.
Right.
And that's what I was in. I was in this medium
of
like chill lighter fuel, where everything on one hand slowed down, but on the other hand, they whisked me 3.5, 4 miles from where I was living in St. John's Wood, central London, to my mother's house in Edgware. Now, if you can understand this, I'm going to try and explain this as best I can. I saw everything in my mother's house from the inside, not from the outside, as you would observe inside a house. It's almost like saying I was inside the stereo equipment where all the electronics are, not looking at it from the outside.
Right.
So it's hard to explain, but that's where I was. So in other words, whilst I could not see the house from the outside, I was, if you like, entangled with the structure. So it was there. And then I saw my mother get up out of bed, hold her chest like she was difficulty breathing and keeling over. It's 3 in the morning, and I'm watching all this, but I'm not watching my mother. I'm watching these little dots all joined together that formed my mother. And I watched her really, really suffering, falling over, and all of a sudden, the beings moved towards her, and then she stood up as if perfectly okay and went back to bed.
Oh, wow.
The beings came to me and took me and whisked me straight home back to bed. When I got into bed, I must have jumped, 2 feet in the air, because it felt like 1,000 elastic bands had snapped on my skin, and my wife immediately woke up. I mean, she's used to waking up with all these strange things happening.
Right.
But this time,
right.
It was too much of a bump. And what happened? I said, you're not going to believe it. I saw my mother. I'm sure she had a heart attack. There's something wrong. And I saw people fix her. So I said, let's call her now. And my wife said, look, you just in case, you better not. You better wait until the morning. Anyway, it was a long wait because nobody could sleep. So in the morning, I picked up the phone. I called my mother and I said, hello, how are you? What's going on? And she is fine. I said, anything happened last night? No. Why? I said, just think back, 3:00. I'm sure something happened to you. I saw you walking around holding your chest. She said, what are you talking? Oh my God, she said. Yes. How did you know that? I said, I got up. I couldn't breathe. I was holding my chest and I was trying to move along the thing to go downstairs and then all of a sudden it went away. So what are we dealing with here,
Incredible. That is incredible.
So that was another experience. Now, one of the weirdest situations that happened, and only happened, I think, about a year ago. We live on a boat here in Hong Kong, where we're speaking to you from now.
Wow.
And I was lying in my daughter's cabin. She was traveling to South America. And out of nowhere, now here you talk about materialization, out of nowhere, a lady materialized in the room while I was lying there. Now, I was feeling very, very down. I was feeling very, very down, admittedly. But I was feeling down for exopolitical reasons, not for any other reason. And this lady she looked about 40, 42, little turned up nose, sweet little mouth, blonde hair, but not straight, maybe slightly coarse and combed back. And she comes in and she's standing and I'm looking at her and she starts talking to me. And the mouth's going and she's talking and I'm more bewildered by her presence in the room than actually what she's saying. And I'm watching and all of a sudden her lips stopped. But the talking continued and just at that juncture, she winked and smiled at me. And I felt incredibly uplifted. And then just as mysterious as she came, she disappeared. And I came upstairs. My wife said, "What's the matter with you? You look like you see the ghost." I said, "Well, yes, I probably did." I said, I explained to her what happened. And, my total mood, everything in my mind changed. I felt 100% recharged. And that was probably the purpose. But when I thought back the next day, I remembered she didn't have normal eyes. She had black eyes.
Mm.
That was amazing. I didn't see it at the time.
Wow.
So these are just an example of experiences, and I'm not the only one. This, as you correctly say, it goes.
Well, that's the thing, right? Exactly.
And where's the best place? The best place is, if you're an experiencer, is go and learn about it, go and study, go and do the research. Don't listen to what people tell you. Go to the institute, get first-hand witness testimony.
Well, let me jump back to that for a second, then we'll get back. I had some questions about your family, and again, still more about your story. But yeah, let me touch on that for just a second. You mentioned in talking about exopolitics the history of exopolitics. Now, I think as far as and forgive my description of it this way, but as far as a buzzword, I think that it's a somewhat recent development, maybe in the past decade, that the term exopolitics has been used so widely and treated as an area of study. But how far back does it go? What exactly? Just very briefly, what would the history be when someone finally decided to put it together and turn it into an area of study that people like yourself, experiencers, can go and use as a touchstone, use as a resource to learn more about what they're dealing with and what they've been through? Okay,
the question you've asked is actually very, very complicated, because if you want to go back, you can go back.
I do that a lot.
You can go back 400,000 years.
Yes,
you can go back to the Anunnaki.
Yes.
You can go back to the Sumerian civilization 6,000 years ago. You can go back to the exopolitical role of the priests and the gods and the people. You can probably go back to if you want to take the antediluvial period before the flood, you can go back to India and you can look at the Mahabharata, the Ramayana. You can talk about the Vimanas. You can talk about the big nuclear weapons that were used, lasers. You can keep going back from 400,000 years. You can go back even further if you wish to, delve deeper. And you come back to more or less around the time when, there was still, if you look at the caves, you'll see incredible pictographs of extraterrestrial-looking beings. You'll see the pyramids. You go back to when we first exploded the atom bomb at Trinity. That was when these ETs realized that these kids had found the matches. They're now dangerous. We can't allow these guys to export this terrible, terrible mentality into the solar system. And
boy, full marks on your response there over the past minute or so, because that really, you're right. The issue itself is such a broad and complicated thing.
But it polarized round about Roswell time.
Exactly. I was just going to say, let's move to that. Right. Wow. So yes, since Roswell, and you get into the 50s and the 60s and some of the Project Blue Book, Project Sign, things like that. But when did the Institute start to become something maybe that had been born in someone's brain somewhere?